And let me just get all of you back up one moment. All right, fantastic. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be talking about implementing and scaling Microsoft 365 with the maturity model for Microsoft 365. As you can see along the bottom of the screen, I've been working with Simon Hudson, Simon Doy, Mark Anderson, and Sadie Van Buren on this project for the past couple of months. So, as Simon introduced, my name is Emily Mancini. I am an architect at Sympraxis Consulting. I am a Microsoft MVP and part of the PNP team. Before joining Sympraxis Consulting, I was a product owner at an organization, and I helped them scale SharePoint from 150 users to over 1,500 users in the span of 4 years. So climbing up that maturity model rapid fire. So a lot of what I'll be talking about today applies from that experience. So we'll be talking about an introduction to the maturity model, how to identify your outcome objectives, the maturity model with the adoption hub, implementing our outcome objectives, and then my absolute favorite part, hopefully convincing you of how you can get involved in the maturity model with us. Essentially, for these first four topics, we're starting at a 30,000-foot view of what is it, how are we going to use it, and then ending with actually some of the technology based off of our outcome objectives, because how much fun is tech if you don't get into the weeds just a little bit? So let's dive into introduction to the maturity model. So starting off with first, why has the maturity model for Microsoft 365 been created? We all really love building cool features on Microsoft 365, whether it's list formatting, Microsoft Teams app, PMP, SPF web parts that the community has built. But we have to see the value that these enhancements provide. And it can be really difficult to get this buy-in from key decision makers as the value of these such features. So we really need to enable the business owners and decision makers to understand this benefit and impact. So the maturity model is really aimed at these groups to enable them to see and understand those benefits that Microsoft 365 can have to the business. It's a framework to support building a holistic view. The framework provides a way for an organization to understand where it is on their Microsoft 365 journey. So often we hear people say, we turned it on, we must be done, but maybe not quite just yet. So the framework allows these decision makers to understand the impacts and benefits that will be realized by focusing their energy on the different aspects and areas of Microsoft 365. So we want to understand the types of business problems that can be solved, the different approaches that there are. We want to make sure we can select the aspects to focus on to really gain these desired outcomes. And finally, we want to make sure that it provides a way to baseline the organization so we can see where it is on its journey and how it's improving over time. It can be really challenging to measure a lot of these softer competencies just by the analytics and usage that we have in our environment. So having this framework to be able to help us track this journey is really powerful. Now, technically speaking, this Microsoft 365 maturity model lives under Microsoft 365 Community Docs, which is an effort under the Patterns and Practices team. So this is all part of this larger Sharing is Caring initiative. So it's a lot of community input. And again, at the end, I'll be talking more about how you can get involved, but we'd love to have you there with us. The maturity model aligns the company on what can and will be done across the platform. So we really want to focus on improving the organization through the use of technology. This will be something you hear me say quite a few different times throughout this presentation. This technology of Microsoft 365 is most successful when we're using it to solve existing challenges in the organization. So maybe you're struggling with raising transparency in decision making. This is a great opportunity for SharePoint communication sites and news. Again, it's this opportunity to benchmark the company in your different departments. So providing this rubric to measure current state, which is critical in measuring that growth, tracking ROI, to share with those stakeholders or decision makers. Collaboration and communication are softer topics. So this develops that language to begin measuring it all because we probably talk about it in different ways across our groups as well. And Microsoft 365 is so much more than those usage statistics because we're shifting the way people are working and communicating to solve these real world problems. It helps you select the appropriate approach, not one size fits all. Your company size, culture, goals, and industry all have impacts on what is the right maturity level for your organization. So I work at a 6-person consulting company, and we may never need to be at a 500 level for communication. That just doesn't make sense for us. And this model isn't really dictating that one level is better than the other, but instead it's focusing the impact so you can choose which one matters to support your objectives. It helps you develop an organizational business and technical roadmap. So this is another thing where we turn it on and now what? How are we supposed to be using Microsoft 365 in our organization? So now that we know our current state and identified a future state, you can use some of these how-to articles that we're developing to navigate a plan to get there. So it enables you to lead and support that strategic planning with the senior management. It helps you align and implement your needs and objectives. So maybe you're beginning your journey, your current state is level 0, right? You haven't done anything. So you can choose which level you want to begin. Some organizations might need to start out at a higher level, like 300 for Microsoft 365 to be really impactful. If we have this unmanaged environment, it really may not be helping us accomplish any of our goals before we've really started to mature and document our processes. So aligning on this impact allows us to focus the traditional requirements conversation for Microsoft 365 on those outcome objectives, which is really about the change we're seeking and working better together. It helps us discuss the use of the platform with IT as well. It's not just the technology. So it's also our job to expand IT's understanding past the systems itself to those outcome objectives it supports. They also need to understand the why of what we are implementing. And lastly, it's a really powerful socialization tool. Majority of your colleagues using Microsoft 365 aren't IT professionals and don't spend the amount of time all of you do in user groups talking about and understanding these platforms. So the maturity model is really a nice Cliff Notes version of what is possible. It's a useful artifact to share with your colleagues to increase their understanding of the platform. And even better, you don't have to maintain it, we do. So it reduces that individual burden of creating these resources for your organization. So, what have we done to really be building the Microsoft maturity model? So, one of the purpose of developing this maturity model is to enable management buy-in, right? So, we don't really want it to be technology or feature focused, and Microsoft is constantly changing this for us. It's not about solving for just the technology. It's these key business challenges. So we're not just enabling teams. We're enabling teams to support collaboration and communication needs. The Microsoft 365 platform is pretty vast. As I've said a couple times, it changes rapidly. So business needs are common and slower. We concentrated on defining a set of business competencies like communication and collaboration that resonate with Microsoft 365 and underpin those business activities. We want to be able to provide tools with this framework, not just information. So this maturity model framework supports organizations identifying where they are in any other function and really talking about what better looks like. The maturity model for Microsoft 365 is not about features, and it also shouldn't only be about IT. We built it using common language so that all those business roles can use this model. And Microsoft 365 is most successful when each department takes ownership of their solutions and becomes champions of this platform. So using the model to discuss your strategic plans is a really great first step in building that alignment. So, where did this really all come from? The maturity model is based on the capability maturity model, which was created in 1987. A lot of you have probably heard this before because the capability maturity model was designed to help organizations build better software and is founded in software development process. And there's 5 different levels going from 1 to 5 with, 5 being that holy grail that's often elusive that we're working on. So looking at the initial level 1 in the bottom left, that's where the model starts, which is really the intro level where things are chaotic, processes aren't documented, it's pretty poorly controlled, and we react to the environment that they exist within. Think of this as you pretty much just turned on Microsoft 365. You've provided no guidance to your organization. We can go up another step to level 2, which is managed. So manage is where things really start to improve and some effort is made to document these processes. However, processes are not necessarily enforced and they might vary from one area of the business to the other. Really often we see groups like HR and IT, accounting, they go first because they have these internal customer facing roles in the organization. So they might be a little bit more mature, while some of the other departments that we haven't worked with just yet, they're still emailing attachments. They're not necessarily collaborating and sharing information exactly the same way. So the processes still aren't really well thought out. And this is where we might have early stages of adoption, right? Some people using OneDrive to share files, still a lot of those file attachments. Then we move up to level 3 defined, and this really takes us up to a notch. And this is where the processes are documented and a little bit more enforced and consistent across the organization. More thought has been put into them. We're being a little bit more proactive. And at this stage, you have the majority of the organization working in the same processes. A lot of times with our clients, this is where I see organizations really trying to jump in and launch Microsoft 365. And they're really quickly going through those early levels with their pilot groups, because when we launch it to the rest of the organization, we want to have clear direction to provide them. Now, moving up to level 4 are quantitatively managed. This level takes those documented processes, which are consistently applied, and adds measures so we can see how effective they are. So this is maybe where we're going to start looking at some of our communication, seeing how it's landing, looking at page analytics and metrics, and focusing on some iterative improvements. And this really aligns well with organizations that are doing different agile approaches. Now, level 5, our holy grail that we're all striving for, but many don't reach and do not necessarily need to reach. Again, this isn't declarative of where you need to be. It's more a guideline of what could potentially happen for your organization at these different levels. So now that we've measured all of these processes in place, we can start to tweak them and see how that affects the performance. We can experiment and choose the tweaks which really provide the best improvements. So what we did is we took that capability maturity model and applied it to the maturity model for Microsoft 365. And again, one of the most important things to understand about the maturity model, not declarative. Every organization doesn't need to be at that high level if it does not align with your outcome objectives or business need. We'll be digging into how to define those outcome objectives a bit more later. I think it's something that I probably talk about in every single presentation because I truly deeply believe that you really need to be aligned on what you're trying to achieve before you're bringing technology into it and moving forward. One thing that's important to note is you can move up or down the maturity model at any point. And Microsoft is making it easier and easier to start at a higher level. We had a really good discussion a few weeks ago with the maturity model practitioners about how out of the box security in Microsoft 365 might have you starting at 200 because out of the box, there's a lot of these features that are already turned on for you. But from a lack of understanding, you might choose to turn them off because you don't know what they mean, and that moves you down a couple of levels. Similarly, using tools like Learning Pathways, which is in the SharePoint Lookbook, it's a Microsoft site collection that you can actually install into your environment. It comes with a ton of Microsoft documentation. You can use that to kickstart all of your documentation processes of how you're using this platform. So maybe if you're starting out Microsoft 365 for collaboration and you already have these out of the box playlists saying, this is how we collaborate in our libraries, you are going to be hitting 200 and 300 right away. So hopefully Microsoft keeps supporting us in those ways and making it easier and easier for us to be at these different maturity levels. But just because we start out at those higher maturity levels doesn't mean that it should just be a reactive view. It's really important. As you can see in level 300, we're defining it, we're documenting. It's policy driven, it's planned. So this is something that we're making intentional choices about as we go up those different levels. So that is a ton of how and why information, but what does it actually look like? So this is a quick view of the maturity model for Microsoft 365, which we've been trying to evolve with the platform. So essentially, this started out with the SharePoint maturity model that Sadie Van Buren had started in 2010. So along the left side, you can see we have our published competencies and open competencies. So Microsoft 365 offers us a whole suite of tools and capabilities, which has shifted what these competencies were back when it was just SharePoint and there weren't as many options, right? We have a lot more business process automation available to us now, for example. So we are focused on building out a set of these 11 competencies to first define the different levels through that maturity model and their subsequent impacts. The next step that we're working on is to understand how to move through those levels, which we're documenting in these far right column, these how to elevate articles. I just said a lot on our introduction, and my favorite thing about user groups is interactions. So, hoping that those who would like to join the conversation come off mute, share your camera. Also, feel free to share it in the chat. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about what kind of maturity challenges you're facing in your organizations.
I mean, I guess from my point of view, because I started yet another company about a month ago, is where do you start? I mean, there's just so much that could be done across so many different business activities, and there's there aren't enough resources to go around, and you've got to kind of put bread on the table, all that kind of stuff. So, if you were in that situation, Emily, which part of the business might you choose to start on, or what would influence your decision?
Good question. I'd say typically, and it'll be a little bit further ahead, so I'll give you a brief answer, but I promise to expand on it more. I think it's really important to look at the different company and department level goals to define our outcome objectives first and then tie them to that. So if we know I have a brand new company, we are global, and even to begin, we just need to be collaborating on content. We're probably going to look at the collaboration competency first and starting to figure out what level we need to be hitting in there to even just begin working together.
I guess reflecting on that, because we haven't prepared this part of the conversation. This is Emily and I kicking it off live. So I guess given that we've been in a lockdown, let's all work remotely kind of situation for a year now, and it's unlikely to really go away anytime soon. Collaboration does make a lot of sense. We need to be pretty damn good at that, otherwise our business, new or old, is not going to really progress. Maybe there are some things that we can let slide for a while if we can get the collaboration piece working.
I would agree. I mean, there's things like customization and development or business processes. That's something that you're going to be figuring out as you develop your organization. So we're not going to automate business processes if you don't even have them yet, right? And typically, if you're just starting out with Microsoft 365, unless you have a really clear business need and something defined, you're not going to start customizing that environment yet. You're probably, to your point, just trying to figure out how do we work together and how do we communicate to each other. I'd say 90% of the organizations we work with, we see them focusing on collaboration, communication, and their people and communities first. Of course, you need the staff and training to support that, but very often you're growing that staff and training in tandem with the levels of maturity of those other competencies, right? You don't necessarily have staff and training at a 500 level when you're communicating at a 200 level.
Cool.
I guess content is also important because you need to know where you're going to put things, and that's something which we're working on at the moment in my company is where do we put all this stuff, how do people find what they need to find and know where to put their project documents, or so it's working through that as well, isn't it, too?
Absolutely. And I'd say that's something where you see really early organizations starting out with, okay, to Simon Hudson's point, we are all in lockdown. We are starting to collaborate. We're pretty much forced into teams if we're choosing Microsoft 365. So if I make a team, I'm getting a SharePoint site right away. Majority of people now have all of these team sites and start using team sites probably for a mix of collaboration and communication, right? So if we're at that 100 level of management of content, then we don't have that very intuitive structure. People are probably going to be duplicating content and having a pretty hard time navigating to find what they need. Dylan, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. I have a slightly different take on this, and it's not so much maturity challenges in your organization. In my role in a consultative basis, my effectively persuade other organizations that they need to be in a higher number of maturity. So I'm just curious with the challenges to persuade an organization that you're currently 200 and you need to be 400. That's me, because effectively that is revenue potential for us in a consultancy basis.
That's fair.
Yeah, so I'm more interested in knowing how to persuade people they need to be at a higher level of maturity than what they are at the moment.
I think it comes back to what they're trying to achieve. So often, hopefully, when we're having that conversations, when they're telling me what they need to be doing better, that's something that we can easily map into the maturity model. I do think it's a little bit of a delicate conversation when you're saying maybe necessarily where they are, but very often people will refer to it as technical readiness, right? So they're saying, I know we need to communicate better and I'm not sure where we are. So often that's when I'll bring in the framework for that conversation to say, well, if we know that you want to be here, let's talk about, what that readiness is and how we can find you on that impact scale, which I'll use an exact example on for collaboration.
Thank you.
And what do you think? I'd love to invite also the Simons into all of this because we work on this all together all the time. So I know that's actually something we had a meeting earlier today where we were talking about a future practitioner section being all about how do you bring the framework into an organization. So what would you add to that?
Well, I guess my sort of often repeated mantra is it's not about the technology, it's about the business. And to your point, Dylan, when I think about this, whenever I find an organization saying, oh, we need a tool that does this, or we need you to fix our something else, my thinking these days, which is different to a year ago, is that's an indicator of a problem with their maturity level. If they've got a problem, it's either because they're actively trying, they know they want to try and improve their maturity in some regard, or it's a consequence of their maturity not being very good, and they've got a chaotic or poorly defined process, and the problem they say they need fixing is kind of the problem, but it's caused by something in their business process being not very mature.
That's fascinating. So effectively, the gap that the customer is expressing is actually a symptom of them being in the wrong place in the maturity model.
That's exactly the way I think about it. Yes.
Yeah.
With my strange clinical background, I think about symptoms and underlying conditions. Yeah.
Yeah. So the maturity model is your underlying condition.
And equally,
around in that
sort of
way.
extending that metaphor to breaking point, you could argue that the maturity model as a whole is a mechanism for promoting the overall health and well-being of the company. And you try and make it healthier by putting all of these levels of maturity in, and that stops you screwing up or getting terminally sick in some other places. So I've actually, again, this is the Microsoft 365 maturity model, but I've started talking to my clients, my private clients, about it, not in terms of Microsoft 365 at all, but in terms of how do you get your business ready for a buyout or something, because you've got to make your processes mature, your business processes. What do you think, Simon? What are your reflections?
Muted.
That's sorry, that's such a fail. I was just saying, Paul had his hand up, so I should let him speak first. And I'll jump in after that.
Oh, thank you for that, chaps. I agree with everything you say there. And what we've done in the past 12 months is looked at customers and put them in boxes and of different sizes. And as they grow through from almost on a customer journey, it creates touch points that you can start having conversations with them about, because you've progressed and grown, you now need to start looking at different parts of your business. And I think this does follow the maturity model as well. But it revolves around data. We all work in the information technology sector, and a lot of focus is put on technology, but that's purely a platform to pass the data around for the right people to make the right decisions at the right time to drive the business forward. And again, it all fits into that same framework. And I just see this as another way of getting businesses to actually sit down and think about their journey themselves, because most of them don't. We see a business, they could start off as a one-man band. Look at Amazon, for example, started off as a one-man band in his garage, and he's grown incredibly, and he's done very, very well. But he'll have made a lot of mistakes on the way that if we actually create the touch points with clients, you can then start having the conversation with them. Right, now look at this, now look at this. Right, you're of a size now you need to look at this. And again, this platform just allows you to then keep delivering and showing and helping them grow easily. And we see this all the time, but it all fits in. We're all saying the same thing, but from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can't resist to respond to the Amazon example as well, because there's such a wonderful example of listening to their business and the business needs. They had no interest in getting involved in groceries, right? But they studied their end users, their clients, and what their clients are spending their time on, what their clients are doing, and found that, oh, well, majority of people who are shopping on Amazon also love Whole Foods, right? And then it comes into this acquisition. So doing this change with the business by what the business needs, understanding where the business is headed, is something that's so critical.
And I think the past 12 months, the pandemic has created the situation where everybody is looking at the business to say, right, all right, we've survived 12 months. How well have we survived the last 12 months? How can we now do it better? Right? Everybody is in that position. So we're all in a great place to start having that conversation with people.
It's
absolutely.
Come back to Dylan's point, which was, some organisations, they're not ready to have the conversation, and it might be that they just haven't reached that maturity in themselves to realise that they need this stuff yet. And I've been reading a book called The E-Myth, and it talks about junior, the sort of the youthful company which grows and then contracts again because it hasn't been designed. And then you have a more mature organization where it starts up and the people are building it and they kind of already know the structure they want to get in place, and then you need to get the systems in place. And that's where the 365 and the maturity model can help with that, to help them get their business ready to kind of to do what they need, what that business needs to be able to do. That sits in well with that, I think.
There's something you said there, Simon, that we need to capture, actually, because you said it hasn't been designed, and I think that's absolutely a key characteristic at level 100. Is what is at level 100, things haven't been designed. And as you go up the maturity level, things become not only more designed, but more intelligently designed with feedback and so heuristic loops and all those kind of clever things. But if you've got a process or you've got anything about your business where no one has sat down and thought about how should this work for best, it's just allowed to happen organically, then that particular department, team, process, or whatever it is probably a level 100 element.
Yeah, I think it'd be hard for anyone to say that level 100 or 200 is successful at their organization because they're still pretty reactive. Daniel, I see you have your hand up as well.
It's really sort of, does the maturity model help with certain organisations deciding which bits they want to keep on-prem and which bits come on the cloud? And I was talking to a client today, and they didn't really have a reason. The client didn't have a reason why they had bits a database on-prem, and it could easily be hosted in the cloud. So does that help with that assurance? Why people keep making those decisions, or help with those decision points?
That's a bloody good question.
Yeah, I was just that's something that I don't know that we have talked about or really considered. And I'll be really
I guess the
transparent
follow-up
that
from that is maturity models for the migrations as well. So from on-prem to the cloud, that is part of that as well. And what happened, and what should they be when they get to on-prem? And
we have talked about creating a competency for migration. It's one of those things that tends to fall between a few stools, so we're not sure. But the question about where do you place your infrastructure and why? So we have got someone helping us work on an infrastructure competency right now. Whether that will answer that question, I don't know. But some of the concepts in the maturity model at least inform the answer. I mean, it's not designed to tell you what to do. It's designed to show you how to do the things you've decided, I guess. Just the understanding what the different levels mean. Level 100 is not designed, level 200 has had some design but it's not enforced, level 300 is designed, documented, rolled out, and there's an expectation with some enforcement that people are going to use it. Those kind of things, that kind of benchmarking will tend to point you towards certain technology decisions, and that for a given organization may or may not mean on-prem versus cloud versus something else.
Sarah,
We ought to have a conversation about that, Dan, and actually see how that helps, because it's a good question.
Yeah, we could say that. Yeah, one of those sessions we have where the security one was quite intense, wasn't it? It was quite. Oh, there was some big beasts there, and we were like trying to work out how we could contribute to that conversation with these big beasts, i.e. Liam. And the other guy, there
Fear
was
of change, isn't it? A lot of it's fear of change.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was for Emily, because I know most of the rest of you already know this, but I work predominantly in training users and in the products. Do you find that a lot of the challenges that businesses face is down to their lack of knowledge as to what the products are?
Yeah,
that they've
absolutely.
Purchased?
Yeah, I see most times we get brought into an organization, especially the past year, so I guess we can just scope it to that because the pandemic has had such a big impact.
Yeah.
They knew they needed to collaborate. They knew they have teams, but then they also tell me that they have Dropbox for external sharing and they're loading their videos over here. They have no idea that there's all of these different solutions and modules in Microsoft 365. They're using SurveyMonkey instead of Microsoft Forms. They're paying all of these additional licenses. I mean, some organizations are paying for Slack, right? And you're like, wait a minute, that could be Teams or Yammer. You have two options here that you could be using. So I do see that a lot. Have you seen a lot of that redundancy across the organizations you've been working with too?
Yeah, even just within Microsoft 365. So, I spend most of my time telling people that if they've got Team, they've also got a SharePoint site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
they don't need to create a separate SharePoint site to do the same job.
I mean, and a distribution list and a shared Outlook calendar and a planner plan. Yeah, absolutely.
And how do I create a security group to go with my Microsoft Teams team?
Yeah.
Let me scratch my head.
Yeah, or pay for Zoom when you've got Teams.
Yeah, I see that one a lot too.
Well, to be fair, I hate to admit this, but I've just paid for Zoom.
What made you make that decision, just out of curiosity?
Customers.
Okay.
Customers demanding to have training sessions over Zoom rather than Teams, and being forced to use their platform, which I then had no control over. So I paid.
Yeah. I will say
it hurts.
Sarah, are they corporate clients?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had that.
And unfortunately,
sorry.
a lot of the time I'm actually training them to use Teams.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Via Zoom.
Yes.
In a way, it's easier because I guess it's kind of hard to show Teams while you're in Teams. So there's that little bit of it. But I will say I had that experience during the pandemic. Outside of work in my personal life, I'm like, hey, let's have a Teams meeting, and everyone wanted to have a Zooms meeting. And there's definitely this perception that is easier to enter. And I don't know if it's the Microsoft like creating an account or what that barrier is, but it's definitely a pretty widespread perception.
Yeah.
Security is the factor. People are lazy. They just want stuff easy, and they're not bothered about giving all the data and security away. It's as simple as that. We all see it.
Yeah, Zoom doesn't bother with security to make it easy to use.
Yeah, that's fair.
Unfortunately.
I'm going to continue us on a little. Oh, sorry, go ahead. If you have something else, I don't want to rush us ahead.
On that particular one, I see both sides. From a user perspective, look, if you just want a meeting, Teams feels a little bit heavy.
Yeah. Continuing us on. So we already touched on this a little bit, but I would love to hear more. What I heard from our earlier discussion on how are you using the maturity model sounds like some people are, sounds like some people aren't, but behind the scenes, we're all still having the same conversation about advancing that maturity, finding those symptoms, trying to advance how we're working. But I'd love to hear any additional thoughts that the group has on that. Is anyone else formally using a maturity model in their organization or a different type of framework to help them decide what to do when?
Emily, we do. We spent a lot of time last year looking at our client portfolio. And again, in January, our target client was manufacturing business with 100 plus seats. As soon as the first lockdown came along, those clients that we had of that profile, they were the first to reduce costs because they've got large overheads, first to reduce costs, first to furlough staff. And as a result, because we charge people on a per device, per staff basis, we reduce their costs because if they furloughed staff, we don't have to support them. Therefore, we don't feel right charging them. So from that, I thought, let's look at our client portfolio. We need a balanced portfolio and not just focusing on the large clients. So that's when we came towards a model of, right, then let's put clients in boxes. So we class a micro business as 1 to 5, a small business as 5 to 10, a medium-sized business as 11 to 50, and then a large business as 51 to 250. So it covers the full SME market. But that's what creates our touch points now. So a business grows and moves from one box to another. We can then offer other products and services to say, now you've grown, you now need to start thinking about these other parts of your business. So, yeah, I fully agree with it. It does work, and it helps the customers see where they fit in and what products are available from my business. So it helps them as well. So, no, I think it's a very good thing.
I love that example too, because thinking about at an organization, even just your variety of internal projects, that some working groups are going to naturally have a different maturity level than others. You might have accounting and HR sharing documents, for example, on one thing, and they're smaller, they need a team site, they can be at this smaller maturity level. But then you have a project management office and they're helping run all of the IT projects, and we need to template our sites and our collaboration and have more consistency. So within organizations, whether it be consulting into clients or just in one organization with their internal clients, we see a variety across all those different boxes.
Completely. And I think this will answer a question that was raised earlier. You're better off, rather than focusing on an organization, focus on a department in an organization, because there's one department that will be switched on, that will listen to you, that can see the benefit of what you're doing. And Dylan, we've worked with Dylan on a project that hasn't materialised yet, but I really do hope it does. That we offered them a small example of how to collaborate within the engineering department that only involved 6 people, but this is a global firm. That little project has caught the attention of the board. It was intended to then just extend to the engineering department, which was sort of 80 odd seats. It's now been adopted, or it's now been seen by the board level, and they can see the advantage and the benefits of it for the whole business. So it's now moved from a little project of, I think, 6 seats, and it will eventually be hundreds, which is frustrating because it's taking so long. But I do think it will eventually materialise. But that just shows that focus on one area that's listening to you, get them as a pilot to buy into it, and then that sells it to the rest of the business.
Absolutely. I agree with that for two different primary reasons. The first, having the message only come from IT and not be owned by the business of why this is impactful can be really challenging messaging. People don't necessarily see that. You also get all of those 6 engineers. Now they're your champions. They're spreading that message for you. They're spreading that like wildfire across the organization. And also they become other touch points when people inevitably have questions. So you're kind of expanding your team of all of the experts in your organization. The other reason I super love it is as a user experience person, I really believe in user testing. And I feel like that always has to be done for every single project for you to know that you're hitting your outcome objectives, what you've picked to implement is working. So how could you know that what we're recommending on this, let's say the information architecture of your collaboration sites, how do we really know that this is working until we've had people try it and get that experience that they can achieve those outcome objectives? So pilots, super powerful always. I'm bummer to hear that it took so long, but I'm glad to hear that it's going faster now. Any other thoughts on how you all are using the maturity model?
But that also talks about success stories, and if that's the power of a success story that's able to get to the senior management, because that's really where it needs to get to for something to happen, isn't it? So you've got 6 people, but they've managed to get that story's got to the top, the people at the top, which will then just push down that idea. I mean, that's fantastic to hear. That's definitely some of the things we want to hear from when we're having our practitioners sessions about what are these success stories, how is it that people are getting Microsoft 365 embedded into an organization.
And that's how those success stories help you drive that leadership with like your steering committee and your stakeholders in the future. I know I used them a lot when I had a global steering committee, and that's how I convinced them that coming to these meetings was worth their time. Is they know that this is impacting the business. So they're like, yeah, I'll show up. I don't know what I need to decide, but I know that it's important. Simon?
So one of the ways that I'm using the maturity model already is, okay, so the problem is, even in a small organization, even in your sort of your micro or nano organization of 1 to 10 people, which I've got one of those, even then the elephant's too big to eat. So what I'm doing is, while I'm trying to work on some particular parts of maturity in areas of the business, anytime we have a new need, we need a new application, new process, bring new people in, whatever that new need is, I'm thinking about what parts of the maturity model apply to that granular activity. How can I introduce this new process or habit in a way that's, say, level 300, and not just let it be a level 100 activity. So it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be just a programmatic approach, I guess, is what I'm experiencing. You can also make it something you just do tactically. Every time you do a new thing in the business, do it in a level 300 or something way.
Dylan, I see you have your hand up too.
Yeah, I was thinking a fascinating case. A customer I'm working with at the moment, it's a migration. And the interesting thing is, because the maturity model doesn't describe the technology, but the process, it's actually quite helpful to think in those terms, because obviously we need to establish what level the customer is present in the legacy system to know that when we migrate to SharePoint, we need to hit that maturity level or better at that point. So it's actually quite interesting, because the maturity model is technology agnostic.
And that's a good point too. Like so often with a file share migration, sometimes I'm convincing clients out of picking up their file share and dropping it into SharePoint. So we can look at the maturity model and say, hey, you can definitely do that. But then it's going to be, look at all these chaotic points, all of these impacts, this lack of understanding. All of a sudden they're like, you're right, maybe we want to spend a little bit more time on this project and change our information architecture and change our structure.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if it's going from a radically different system like M-Files, where M-Files is just completely different to SharePoint, it doesn't think in SharePoint's hierarchical way, but it's just about metadata. You've really got to map everything and make some significant changes. And the maturity model is quite helpful to think at what point they are now and where they want to be. And you're not attached in a prescriptive way to say that at level 300 you have a communication site that has the following attributes. You're just describing the sort of processes that take place.
Exactly. Paul, I see you have your hand up too.
Yeah, we see that a lot as well, Dylan. I think you do make a good point. It's how, where does a client want to be? Where does a business want to be in the future, not just now? So it makes it scalable, the scalability easy. But I think what we try to do on projects is look at it in phases. So rather than look at the whole thing, well, they say, how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant with a knife and fork and small little bite sizes. So you break down a project into phase 1, 2, and 3. So you agree a phase 1 to introduce essentially the basics that will cover what they're doing already. That again is a bit of a pilot, gets the business to buy in, builds the trust, etc. But then that's all you have quoted for, and that's all the business are willing to pay for. But as the project progresses, people start thinking, have ideas, come up with other suggestions that haven't been budgeted for, but will extend the cost and the time budget of a project. So we put them into an opportunities document to say, right, then once we've completed phase 1, because you need to complete phase 1 for the client to get trust, complete phase 1, then right, all of these ideas came out of the process of completing phase 1. We can now give you a proposal for them, and it's going to cost you X, Y, and Z, because when somebody comes up with an idea, they just think, brilliant, I want to do that. If you just incorporate it, there's no cost involved in that. So they expect that as part of the initial proposal. But as soon as you sit down and say, right, that thing you want's going to cost you 50, 60 grand, they'll go, well, hang on a minute, right? They're doing immediate ROI in the head going, right, is that actually required? Am I prepared to pay 60 grand for that?
And it helps them understand that complexity, right?
Yes, exactly.
We have that so often where they say, okay, we're implementing Microsoft 365 and we want automatic document routing. And you're going from 0 to 500 in some cases, right? And then so there is that level of education of, we can do that. First of all, do you have the processes? And so often they don't even have a documented process. So internally, they're not even at level 300 to be able to tell you what that automation is, right? But then once they understand that piece, okay, well, this is how we build it. They had no idea they were asking for something so complex, and you can really level set them on that.
You can't automate a process that isn't there.
Yeah, and that might be my second conversation after your team comes with a SharePoint site. Simon, is that a new hand or an old hand?
I think that must be an old hand.
Okay.
Simon's an old hand at these things, so bad.
It would be cool if Teams was smart enough to know when you started talking to take your hand down. That would be pretty nice. Maybe we'll put that on their 500 maturity level request, right?
Exactly.
Let's raise user voice.
Yeah. Is user voice back yet? So last discussion before we kind of dive into what it sounds like a lot of you already understand. So I'm actually really enjoying the conversation, if you don't mind us spending so much time here. I'm really curious what some of the biggest challenges specifically around communication you are facing, because I know this is a pretty big topic since we have Teams and Yammer and email and phone and all of these different areas. What kind of things are you seeing across the organizations you're in or working with?
I'll jump in here because I'm working with a marketing company, and I've got to remember this is recorded. But yeah, so working with a marketing company, and I have to say, my thoughts and changes in what I think is doing are changing quite rapidly. And it's about how we use Teams to talk about what's going on, what posts are going out, and so the biggest challenge is just to keep talking and keep them up to date with what my thinking is that minute, and so that's it's keeping people up to date with what I'm thinking and the sort of the strategy that the company's going through. That's my biggest challenge.
Paul?
We've seen this a lot, Simon, over the past 12 months, and it's putting a framework in place to provide a platform for people to air their voices. We went through a stage of having to work from home, And because we use, our staff are quite young, they're aged 17 to sort of 21, because that's the model that we use in the business. We needed to rather than, I don't like micromanaging. Micromanaging doesn't do anybody any favors, but we need to be able to provide a platform where people can express how they're progressing with particular work that they're on with. What if they've got any problems and they need any help, that they can raise their hand and ask for that help in a safe environment. And we moved to a team meeting twice a day, once first thing in the morning, just to get people focused on what they were going to achieve in the day. And then another one just after lunch to say, actually, I'm supposed to achieve this by 5 o'clock, but I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. And then it allows people to come in and give that person a hand to essentially take the problems away from them. I come from a project management background. Started off with Prince 2, which is huge and big and clunky and great, but again, you only pick the certain bits that you want, and then got thrown into an agile environment, which taught me loads, because it's a case of, right, we've got this thing to complete, right, and we've got this team to complete it with, and all we have to do is take the reasons for people not completing tasks away. And I've brought that back into the business. So it's a case of, right, how do we help somebody complete a task? What's stopping them? And then taking that away from them and then giving that to somebody else if it's a task in the business that needs to be done. So it's all about creating a framework and a communication line with customers on projects, with team on team matters. But it's something that people feel safe working in, and they know the limits. And as soon as they hit the limit, they then ask for authorization or acceptance or whatever from the appropriate level of authority.
Yeah, I love the 2 points you brought up there, right? That safe space to be having that conversation, which depending on the platform and method you choose, may not feel so safe. Like, for example, Simon called out, he's like, oh, right, we're recording, right? Sometimes in a meeting, that changes the safety of the situation immediately and what we're willing to say. And the other thing that you called out, I didn't even mention meetings as a way of us having primary communication. I just talked about flat written things, but that's a really good point, that majority of the way we're all working with each other and talking is in a lot of these meeting spaces. And how are we necessarily capturing that communication and then maybe even sharing it outside of that small group? All right, we'll continue back on into kind of talking specifically about the communication competency, but please feel free to come off mute and interrupt and add in, because I do think the value of the conversation comes from all of us for sure. So one thing that we've all kind of referred to and already talked about is that these maturity model articles have the different levels, and we've tried to structure them so they're pretty consistent in style. So when you go to the different competencies, you can jump straight in. So this becomes a resource where, let's say we're talking right now about communication. That's kind of what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time today. So knowing I want to evaluate communication in my company, I can go look at this article, read the impacts of the different levels. I might even know to skip ahead and say, you know what, I want to have defined communication. What does that impact look like? I'm not necessarily reading it from A to Z, so I'm picking out the parts that matter to my organization. That's the closest we're going to get at looking at them live, because they are pretty big documents on the web. So not the most engaging for a user group or for a presentation. But I will pop a lot of the resources into the chat towards the end of the presentation too. So as I promised a bunch of times, I keep talking about outcome objectives. So let's talk about how we define them. And this works not only for the maturity model and figuring out what goals you have, but it's also something I do before every single site build with any group that I'm working with. So these user stories help us outline the goals of the personas into a feature list, and they truly serve as our North Star as we focus on what's critical for that project. Instead of someone saying, you know, I need to have audience targeting. Well, why do you need audience targeting? I need to understand what is the objective that you are accomplishing with having that feature, because too often we get really tied up in those features and don't necessarily have reasoning for it. They also serve as questions for our task-based testing to measure those implementations and showcase success to those project stakeholders. So as we were talking earlier about that pilot with the engineers, being able to then have a pilot group gave you that task-based testing to say, yeah, this type of collaboration and this type of process that they're working on, we've measured it and we can say this is successful. And as I mentioned earlier, and we're all aligned on we're implementing solutions, not just the technology. So focusing on these goals is the most important part of that conversation. And this is really where you're bringing in your stakeholders to be part of the process so they know where the data came from, to increase trust in the outputs of these conversations with the business. And we also need to involve the business to explain their challenges. What are we actually trying to achieve? What are we helping solve for them? We're the problem solvers. I'd say it's kind of like going to a restaurant. Sure, if I go to a Mexican restaurant, maybe majority of people order a taco or burrito, but can you imagine what it would be like to go in there and just have the waitress or waiter tell you what you wanted? Maybe they're going to be right, but it might also not be exactly what you needed. I am allergic to dairy, so I have a very specific order. You need to understand what your internal customers are trying to do to really be able to give them that impactful solution. Teams may not be the solution for every type of collaboration, for example. And improving any of these maturity model competencies, right, is something that we're going to be doing with the business and going through that with them together. So an example, right, we have a user, which is our HR manager, and they need to share localized benefits updates. And their goal is that each region only sees the specific updates to their own benefits. So again, this is our true north throughout the project, and we can use it to measure how successful that implementation was. And at more specific levels, you can measure things like homepage content priorities and use it to generate those tasks in user testing. So very often, I'll be working with an organization, and at the beginning of the project, we'll talk about what they're trying to achieve. And let's use the communication site as an example. And they tell me the top 5 things, but then it comes time to actually build the site. And they're like, well, it's really important that we have the next upcoming running group on the absolute top banner of the homepage. Well, this now serves as our area that we can look at, and it's a neutral party where we're saying, well, that's not really what this project was about. That's not necessarily the primary objective in your scope. So it also gives you some data to hold up against changing requirements as you're working on them and really being aligned on what is actually the most important that the business has already agreed on. So when you're outlining these top tasks, don't forget to include the varying audiences like managers, leadership, and the content owners themselves, because supporting your content owners' needs ensures they have no friction updating their content areas and it stays valuable as a resource for the whole organization. So since we're talking about communication right now, I'm going to be pretty heavy on those content owners. There are now those tasks that our end users need to complete. So take it a step further and align these to the company goals to start creating that documentation of how Microsoft 365 supports these initiatives. So that's what we were talking about earlier when Simon said, if I'm starting a new organization, how do I know what I need to be doing? Well, first we need to look at these different outcome objectives, align it to our company goals. Now we can take these and look at the different impacts in that maturity model, and we can help prioritize those projects across departments. Really often, this is where I find organizations getting pretty caught up where every department's project is the most important, of course, because that's their goal. But if you take that and hold that up against the company goals and you hold that up against what maturity you're at and how hard it is to get to the next level, it's going to become pretty clear pretty quickly which ones should go first and which ones are going to have that highest impact. So now that we know what we're trying to achieve with our outcome objectives, there's a pretty big free resource. Has anyone worked with the Adoption Hub before? Okay, awesome. I see Sarah has, Simon has. Cool. I'll be pretty light on it, but this helps support a lot of the maturity model conversations. So the adoption guide workbook is on adoption.microsoft.com, and it helps build common language around things like assessing readiness, identifying targets, anticipating impact. For a lot of organizations, Microsoft 365 is something that's put onto the IT team, and they may not have experience implementing it. So what I really like about it is it has all of these different phases that we'll see in the next slide. And there's a great way to hold up the maturity model to better support this adoption guide, because it's really at a high level where they're saying, okay, define your business strategy. Well, how are you going to identify your business scenarios? That's where the maturity model is going really, really specific into those different impacts. And we've already talked a lot about how you can then also use the impacts in the maturity model to assess your readiness to find that symptoms and those gaps in where you are. We've also talked a little bit about those continuing phases, right? You have your phase 1 of implementing. Well, what about in phase 3 when we have that encouraging ongoing engagement and we're building in feedback cycles? We might just be launching at a lower level, but then we still have more to go and grow through as we're working with this organization. So this is just a peek at this business scenario mapping at its most simple form, right? We're defining a successful project journey for an employee. So this is where you're aligning your I want to goal statements with the impacts on each level, identify where you want to be. You can then use those elevating articles where we are a little bit more technology specific to identify how to get there from where you are. So that's what we're going to do together next. And I'm going to go pretty quickly through this because I feel like we've all talked about it quite a bit already. So essentially, it's this crawl, walk, run where the maturity model is helping us understand the level of those possible solutions. So looking at these 3 different scenarios and mapping them to our maturity model, we can see, for example, this HR manager who wants each region to only see specific updates to their benefits. The 200 level, there is where you're really starting to target information, but the 300 level is when they have this awareness and we're supporting localization. So you might find that you're hitting ranges of how you can support something. Something might be a little bit more of a manual and defined process. Going up another level, it might be a little bit more automated and scalable. Marketing, for example, they want to have consistent logo and template usage across the organization. I can easily do that at the 300 level on a communication site, but the 400 level would be using something more like organizational assets and having that be available across site collections with less friction. Then we have senior leadership where they want to share this high priority company news and they want this to be prioritized over all other news and have higher read rates. Right now, to prioritize news, we would need to manually make it a top story or build some automation. This will get easier as Microsoft releases new features like Boost News, which allows a new story to be a top feature until it's read. So for right now, we would probably call this something around a 400 level. I want to do a quick time check with the Simons because I'm new to the Leads user group. I saw we have a span of 2 hours. Do we have time for another discussion point or should I be heading more towards wrapping up?
It kind of entirely is down to the audience. I mean, sometimes our sessions go on until we're all wrapped around drinks and still talking. So if people are up for the discussion, just keep on going.
Paul? Okay, awesome. So I guess our next discussion point, I'm really curious what governance at your organizations look like for those different communication tools, and if you have any of these different guidelines of what to use when.
Okay, just to kick that off, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, we are, in all of my businesses, we're very clear that we disallow any of those peripheral or consumer tools. You know, we have a single consistent set of communication tools, and you have to use those, no exceptions. And I've got rid of staff in the past who've breached that. Now, I tend to work in regulated industries, so it's really important to have that level of structure in many cases. And the only way I can get the governance I need is by using the tools that we mandate. So going beyond that, I have not at this point formalized which of the many tools within 365 you should use for different jobs. So I guess, you know, we've got bits of level 3 and 400 and bits of level 200 in terms of the way that we're working.
And you made a good point too about regulated versus non-regulated, right? You have to be at a different level in that maturity model depending on your industry. And I will say some of the regulated industries I've worked with, I've been really surprised. Like they will have an open company-wide distribution list, but they want their Microsoft Teams chats to disappear within 30 days and not be discoverable. Seems kind of inconsistent across those different rules there. Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself this time, which helps.
Perfect.
Yeah, user error. I agree again with what Simon says, but I think you can bring governance to non-regulated sectors as well, and I think that's always a good thing. and what we've found that works, and what I've found that works in the past as well, and again, I'd like a conversation with you guys externally from this, is a third party project manager that sits between the service provider and the solution provider, which again would be the two Simons and Dylan, and then the client themselves, that manages the delivery of the entire project but isn't involved in the delivery. We see works fantastically because it holds all sides accountable, and without getting involved. Because, and again, as a prime example is a good friend of mine who are web and app developers, are stuck in the middle of a project at the moment that's gone completely out of control because they are trying to manage and deliver the same thing. And it's just all lines of responsibility have got grey and clouded, and now it's some people are taking it personally where they shouldn't be taking it personally, and again there's personal involvement, which then leads to all sorts of problems really. And again, the whole introduction and implementation of Office 365 and the whole of the ancillary products can be done very, very well with the aid of a third party. This is not me trying to sell my services. This is this is trying to help you guys, because we've seen this happen before. You need that one person who has no association with one provider and two clients, just to hold everybody accountable and say, right, because all you're doing, project management is the easiest thing in the world, right? You agree a timetable, right? Deliver this to this cost to this time, but other external factors get in the way. And the external project manager or the independent person can cut through that and then find out what's causing the problem, what's causing the hold up, and actually facilitate and negotiate and handle the whole situation where everybody still feels on board. And again, that then helps you sort of scope out the project in the first place without a personal involvement in it, because the client doesn't think that, oh, you're the service provider, you're just trying to sell all these extra services. You get a very objective point of view from it, and it really, really does work. And we've used it in some of our projects when we deliver to clients as well, just because of it makes life easy, because when things go wrong on a big project, they go very, very wrong. And it can end up costing one or the other side a lot of money, a lot of extra money that somebody has to concede and take the hit on, which none of us want. So it's just an observation that I've made.
Yeah, fair point. If you don't mind me calling specifically on you, Sarah, I'm curious because you do a lot of training. If you have, when you're working with other organizations, if they give you guidance of telling your different those end users, those employees of, when you are collaborating, you're doing this here. When you're doing a company-wide communication, it's here. Do they ever provide that type of guidance?
No, but it's usually one of the questions they ask.
Mm-hmm.
What do we use? Which tool do we use for what purpose? And it is a lot down to choice for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, some tools are more appropriate for other circumstances, but it literally comes down in most cases to which tool you want to use, and why.
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve?
That's interesting, because I can imagine what I've seen in organizations are, we were all on email, and then we had SharePoint. People were really into that. And then Teams came out and everyone's like, oh, forget SharePoint and email. Everything always is going to happen in Teams. But then in our personal lives, we navigate different communication channels, to your point, for different outcome objectives.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to work, all of a sudden we throw that away and we just want the one communication channel. But then it becomes information pollution, because everything across varying action items and action types are in this one spot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of my favorite sayings is OneDrive is for one, Teams is for teams, and SharePoint is for shared information.
Yeah, I love
and I
that.
probably say that 1,000 times a day. But that's not entirely true either, because it depends how you want to use them.
With the lines further blurred by being able to pull SharePoint libraries into OneDrive, and and this is the complexity is with considerable versatility comes considerable confusion. I think Spider-Man said that.
But I also like to point out to organizations that it doesn't have to be purely process driven. Within the tools, we have a series of what I call safety net features. Your communication compliance, your data loss prevention, your retention policies, sensitivity labels, etc., that can all help users not accidentally do things in the wrong place.
Sarah, I think what's important there, it's all driven by the company. Like, the company has to make a decision that you can then configure the product to do.
But they
Without
can't make the decision without the knowledge.
So that's what you help them for.
Yeah.
I mean, we're here to help. We're here to give people information for them to make the decision, not for us to make the decision for them.
Exactly.
And I guess what we've tried to do with the maturity model is actually set levels of that knowledge, so that they can walk into it going, okay, so you've told us we've got to do this thing. How much of that do we need to do? You go, well, here's how you can benchmark yourself in how good you want to be, and if adequate is good enough for you, then go right ahead and be level 200. If you want to be top hole, then be looking at how you get your communication activities to level 400 or 500.
Daniel, I see you have your hand up too.
Yeah. How do you start organizations that have got a raft of communication tools like WhatsApp? Some people using WhatsApp, some using Slack. How do you help them focus on the tools that add the most value and bring them on board and bring people on board to move from one tool onto another? I think WhatsApp is a case that it's not regulated, it's not managed. How can you put policies against it and control it? So what's your experience when you work in organizations?
So I can give you probably a Slack and Teams example. Typically, that becomes part of our determine readiness part of the conversation, where we're saying, I try to get more information from them around what they're achieving with Slack and why they're using it. That does tend to blend pretty quickly into a feature conversation as well, because there are some really specific things that they picked Slack for, and it's really important to know why they picked that tool. Then it usually comes into this mapping of, well, this is what we have available here. Here's some pros, cons. And then when we run into challenges of some kind of feature gap, offering them another solution, or even just calling out that this isn't something that Microsoft 365 can necessarily fully support. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I mean, I guess, although this is clearly, around being able to produce a maturity model that supports Microsoft 365, as Emily said at the beginning, we have also explicitly said that it's technology agnostic. We don't choose those characteristics which take us to a Microsoft 365 product. And so you should be able to take the maturity model and say, for collaboration, take a look at it and say, how does Slack work against our different levels? And the answer will be, well, we need to do these things using Slack, and that'll be fine. So if someone wants to take the model and use it to support Google technology or Amazon technology approaches, that's absolutely fine. And the tool is designed to be robust in those situations. So it's not in itself intended to say, don't use technology B, use technology M. However, what you can do is say, so we know we want to be at level 400 for communication. And to do that, we need to be able to achieve these different characteristics. Can we do that with the technologies that we've chosen to use to date, Slack or WhatsApp or whatever? And what that should do is create some sort of cognitive dissonance. Go, well, I really want to use WhatsApp, but I can't do this thing, this thing, this thing. So, and that should drive a management decision about either lowering their expectations, which they might not want to do, or raising the bar on the technology that they choose to employ.
I guess also there might be other impacts as well. Like, for example, if you were using WeChat, there's talk about some of that information being leaked to into Chinese governments, and so maybe there's some espionage on IP or something. So there could be some security and governance area there. The reason why is you wouldn't want to use those platforms, or you lose some capability. If you've got your content in another system, then you can't, your teams can't discover and find that information. So you get impacted in that way. So so scaring them or the functionality. That's a couple of ways.
Sarah, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I've got a WhatsApp scenario for you that you can quote if you want. I can't give you the company name, but people who are based locally to Leeds might guess who it is. A window and door manufacturing company, also do servicing, and they use a WhatsApp group for communicating from the service centre out to their guys on the road. And what they were finding is data was going to competitors because the WhatsApp chats were being shared when people were going to appointments for measures. They were finding competitor organisations around. So they didn't realise they could do all of this inside Teams, because they didn't realise they could use the mobile devices with Teams. And having moved it across and introduced them to that, they discovered the source of their leak and were able to plug the hole, shall we say.
Wow.
Serious.
And it was simply from a conversation about, did you know you can do this in Teams? And implementing communication compliance for them. So
interesting.
Dylan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking right back to the start, and we talked about applying the maturity model to different parts of the organisation. Do you see it as something you apply per department or per function? So in other words, you talked about your communications are at a certain level, or would you talk about your marketing department being at a certain level, or both? I was just wondering how you would target different functions, whether you think of that as being a departmental basis or a sort of job function within the organisation basis.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm sure we'll all have different answers. I'll start with mine, but I would love to hear everyone else's opinions too. I have seen a lot of, hopefully, a department somewhat owns that from a business process perspective. So the organizations that I've worked with, for example, someone does own the communication policies and that higher level. So they tend to be one and the same. Depending on the granularity of us working with an organization, we might just be working within those groups solving specific problems, and I would apply the maturity level just to the department. Other times we're doing a very high level company discovery and we're summarizing what those are, and we're probably picking something on a lower level. I would argue you can't have one group at a 500 collaboration level and another one at a 100 level and be like, well, we're pretty much 500. I think you're probably on the lowest common denominator in those scenarios, because it's not enforced throughout the whole organization and documented, which would be your 300 level. But I would love to hear other opinions. And while I hear those, I'm going to pull up the self-assessment we keep referring to and pop the link into the chat.
So first of all, as a business principle, Dylan, I always take any either or question and do my very best to corrupt it, because almost all either or questions are actually neither or both questions. And in this case, I think it's absolutely both. I think that both processes and, or functions and departments need to drive their maturity. Some need it more than others. And if you've got parts of a organization or business which are critical to the success of that business, it's probably more important you drive that maturity, regardless of whether it's a function or whether it's a department. So, I tend to think of anything which is regulated, anything which is to do with quality, anything which is driving operational efficiency or productivity. Those are the kind of things where the management will probably be okay spending money on some kind of consultant intervention. So they ought to be spending some money on driving maturity up and using the maturity model as their benchmark for what they choose to do and how they do it. So I definitely think it's both.
And it might be by geography as well, because I could imagine in a large multinational, different areas of the organization might be at different maturity levels.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's one of the things which I think is really important for people to take away is you don't take the entire organization up to level 400. You just won't be able to achieve that. And even if by some strange miracle tomorrow your organization was 400 across the board, by Friday there'd be some new thing which they were doing, some innovation, and that innovation would be at level 100 or 200. So you can't expect to be at a consistent level. What you can do, and this kind of comes back to, in some ways, what Emily is about to show us, is you can not only benchmark the entire organization, but you can use the tool at a granular level and go, okay, let's just think about our sales process. How mature is that? And how mature does it need to be? Our finance process, even just billing. How mature is that? How mature does it need to be? And after a while, it gets to be a habit just to think that way.
Good point. I see you have your hand up, Paul.
He's muted.
Found mute again. Sorry, chap. I will get used to this this old video conferencing thing at some point. I agree with Simon that there are different levels, and I think department to me is a little bit of a each department has its own levels of seniority within that department, and it sort of falls into the same regime as reporting. You've got the people on the coalface that do the doing on a day-to-day basis that need a sort of cross-check on what they've done. Then the next step up is management, so they just need a check on what those people on the coalface are doing. And the people at the top, which is the most senior people, who are the directors, just need a traffic light system to say, right, is everything going to plan? And again, the whole maturity thing fits, I still think, fits into those phases as well. So to me, it's more role orientated than it is department, because every department has those three seniority levels.
That's a good point. I would say I see that a lot with communication, especially. You actually have the people who are doing the communicating, doing the posting, are actually more advanced than the people who are blessing the message. They may not actually know how to be communicating through all of these different channels as well. So those different roles in the organization do have a really big impact. All right, let's continue on. I think for our next section, we've already talked a lot about advancing in maturity levels, and we've talked a little bit about implementing our different use cases. Before I go through talking about actually implementing these two items, I'm just going to pause at the beginning of each one and ask, do you all already know this? Because you're a very smart bunch, and I don't want to tell you something you already know and take up our time. So has everyone worked with organizational assets before? Sounds like universally awesome. And then what about when it comes to your page templates? Have people worked a lot with templating options across Microsoft 365? Awesome. I will show you my only one slide about that then. I'm skipping over a lot of the SharePoint news because it sounds like you all know that as well. So when it comes to templating, the one thing that I've mapped out that I've found to be a really useful in conversations with our clients is which of the different options do what. So being able to figure out which scale, and this is again a maturity level conversation where do we have something consistent in how we're sharing news across all of the organization, or is it just one department? If it's just one department, I might just use page templates because it's just centralized to that site collection. If I'm trying to find something to go across site collections and across the organization, I'm probably going to use one of these other options like ShareGate, a third-party migration tool, or Orchestry for making templates, or P&P provisioning. I will say what continues to be the saddest thing from my opinion is that site designs don't support those page templates, because I do really love them and I love the beauty of them being right there up in that settings box to be able to apply to sites, being able to provide it to the organization and have that self-service option. But until they can do page layouts, they're just missing that critical gap. So since we've talked so much about all of your different thoughts and opinions, I would love to invite you to get more involved with the maturity model. So we'll just hit pretty quickly on what those opportunities are. First, I'll just call it a little bit of the history. So as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, that the SharePoint maturity model was kicked off by Sadie Van Buren in 2010. And then in June during the pandemic, we started, Mark Anderson and myself started collaborating with Sadie to really bring that up to Microsoft 365, since so much has changed in the past 10 years in this environment that we're working in. We just put a tweet out into the world, which connected us to Simon Doy and Simon Hudson, since this initiative aligned with something they were already thinking about. And it was just an excellent opportunity for us all to begin this remote collaboration, which we've now been doing for almost a year, weekly, which is crazy to think how often we have been working together in this time. So just like that open loop network at your organization, Twitter is an excellent community to find new collaborators and user groups. So I'm so excited that I got to meet you all today. And we're always looking for more people to provide feedback and comments, challenge our thought processes in the maturity model. There's a lot of different ways to help us grow this open source initiative. The first one I would say is even just socializing it, helping us get the word out that this exists. You've all been helping us a lot today by asking a lot of questions, and even suggesting some changes and challenging our thinking. Sharing your experiences is really helpful as well. We called out that those anecdotes and success stories are really impactful, and I'll talk a little bit more about the maturity model practitioners, which I invite you all to join us in the upcoming months if you're interested and want to continue this maturity model conversation more focused on different modules and how you're applying them in your organizations. And then, of course, you can always contribute content. So whether you want to make a product-specific article about going up the maturity levels, whether you have a use case, a success story, any of your perspectives and experiences are really impactful for adding into Microsoft Community Docs, whether it is maturity model specific or even just the Microsoft Community Docs. So if you're not familiar with it already, just like docs.microsoft.com, it lives on that same URL. Docs.microsoft.com is more focused on the technical capabilities. And then our goal with the Microsoft Community Docs is to talk more to these business users and the why behind the technology and around the decision making. And I've heard a lot of fantastic thinking. So if you have any questions about how to contribute to those Microsoft Community Docs, we have what is called Sharing is Caring training sessions. So we actually have hands-on training on how to use GitHub, how to use Markdown. I'm also happy, just, direct message me on Twitter and I'm happy to support you with a Word document and getting that posted. Anything that I can do to get your thoughts and opinions out there on Microsoft Community Docs, I'm happy to help. Just a quick overview of the practitioners for the maturity model for Microsoft 365. We try to create it as this safe space to hone your pitch, test your thoughts, decide how to promote the maturity model. It's discussion based, a lot like it was today here. We'll pick different topics each month. As Daniel pointed out, we talked about security last month. So we'll highlight each month the different new assets that we have, get feedback on that maturity model, help in understanding the different competencies. Sometimes we'll talk about mapping that technology to the maturity levels, talk about how to run a workshop. And then again, we really like sharing anecdotes and success stories. So just my quick pitch of really trying to convince you to be part of this initiative with us. Throughout this initiative, we've learned a lot from each other's perspectives and really gained these insights into some of the competencies we may be less familiar with and stretched our thinking on areas we felt we were a subject matter expert. Having any of those different outside perspectives will really share because you're coming from the different industries you've worked with. And I would even say from having global perspectives has been really eye-opening for me throughout this project. Having this shared goal offered us the opportunity to develop better collaboration techniques and connect across the globe during a time of what was some pretty intense isolation. I had just started speaking in the community right before the pandemic, and I had one conference and then it was locked down since then. So it has been an absolute joy for me to get to collaborate with the Simons across the pond throughout this whole process. And this has been my favorite piece is typical networking and knowledge sharing conversations at conferences has not been possible this year. So thank you again for inviting me to your user group to be part of it and opening these conversations and welcome me to be part of it because it's something I've so sorely missed for the past year plus and I hope comes back soon. So just thank you all again, and I hope that we continue the conversation in other ways, and maybe I see some of you at our Maturity Model Practitioners call in May.
And it's 3 p.m. UK time on the 18th.
Oh, thank you. I could have edited that slide and made it a little bit more localized.
Yeah, all good. Well, Emily, thank you so much for taking some of your time out of your day to come and talk to us about this. It's been really good to have you and talking about what we've been up to and sharing your insights as well. So we look forward to you coming talking for us again soon. And you're always welcome to come and just join in the discussion.
Fantastic. I know you're one of the chattiest user groups I've ever had the opportunity to join. So it has been an absolute pleasure for me, which has been great.
I think we pride ourselves on that, don't
we? There's nothing worse than giving a presentation to people who just sit there like this.
It is pretty rough. I've absolutely enjoyed the engagement all day today.
The problem is you never finish on time because we always interrupt.
What's time? To me, time was 20 minutes from now, right? So I think we've made it. And I'll just pop these resources into the chat as well for those that are interested.
I think, Emily, from my point of view, the whole presentation was very well structured because you gave a bit of information and then you opened it up to engage with us. So you were offering that opportunity to start the discussion. A lot of presentations you just get talked at, whether that's on Zoom or actually in a live event, and those are the bits that you walk away with a headache.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I believe in the collective knowledge of the room. I'm coming from one perspective, so I can't possibly know everything and have every right opinion, right? So my favorite part about speaking is getting to meet all the different people and hearing what you're working on and struggling with and what you've seen out there. Expand my perspectives too.
Definitely.
Very cool.
Right. So is it that time? Do we, pop off for a couple of minutes, have a drink, and then chat?
What's the general view? Are people wanting to get away or carry on?
I'm quite happy. I think it's been a good session tonight. I think there's a lot of points that can be discussed a bit further.
Mm-hmm.
So go and get a beer then.
I'm going to reappear with wine.
Right. I'll see you shortly.
Right. And Emily, you're very welcome to stay, but we do understand that it's still the middle of your working day and not playtime. So
yeah,
it is. I mean, if I could get a beer right now and join you all, I would love it. But unfortunately, I don't think my next meeting would appreciate it. So I will go pop off and prepare for that instead. Okay. But next time I will plan ahead.
Yeah, the next meeting could go very differently.
Yes. Outlook help. I think I need my wits about me. Thank you all again and enjoy your
Thank you
social
very
work.
much, Emily.
Cheers,
Really
Emily.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I should go get myself a drinky. Back in a minute.
Cheers.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Hello, Dylan.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Oh, all right. I'm in the spare room, which is a change from my normal office. My wife's got a little laptop table set up here, and it's quite weird working in here. It's actually quite pleasant.
Has it thrown you at all, or has the change of scenery worked for you?
I don't know. In some ways, it's quite nice. I might actually do some work from here. It's just I haven't got huge. My normal desk has a 38-inch monitor and a secondary monitor for screen sharing. So this is really weird having just one screen and one keyboard. And working off a laptop is kind of weird if you've got used to all that screen estate.
Yes. Yeah. I can't. I have one screen, whether it's just laptop or I plug it into a docking station at work. I lose my mouse too much, and I get very frustrated by trying to find it again. So I just stick to one screen to make life easier.